Hi guys. Okay, so we'll start week 5 of our little remote learning program. Last week we shifted our focus to A Christmas Carol, and we looked at it, did some revision and retrieval generally about the book, just to get your brain into A Christmas Carol mode. But then at the same token, we looked at that character. So you could well get a question in your exam about character, and we looked at the character of Scrooge and how he changes, and that was a really good way to work through the book. What I want to look at this week is themes. Bo. I think that if you have a really good understanding of themes as a concept and in concrete terms in each text, your thesis sentences in your essay writing will get much better. Okay, so first of all, just to make sure we're all clear about what a theme is, because it's a fairly complex idea. And on this screen, I've put several definitions of what we mean by the word theme, which gets bandied around a lot in English. On the most simple level, a theme simply means the central topics. What is the book about? So, whereas we would say the characters are Scrooge, the Cratchits, the ghosts, the themes means the topics, the meta, and that also relates to this idea of underlying messages and big ideas. Dickens is a writer, very much so, who wasn't just writing to entertain, he was writing to communicate messages and ideas. So when we're talking about themes, that's literally all we mean. What are the topics? What are the messages? What are the ideas? So then when we're talking about themes, to get the high marks and to do really well in and be effective at analysing literature, we're trying to answer these sorts of questions here. What belief about their world is the author trying to communicate? So what are we trying to tell us about the world they lived in? And then importantly, does this transcend that one world? So transcend means move beyond. So some stories very much capture something about the world in which they were written. Some stories capture something bigger. Macbeth, very much the case. It doesn't just capture something about the world of Jacobean England, it captures some really big ideas about what it is to be a human being that are relevant to all time periods. And I guess the biggest questions we're basically answering when we're talking about theme is, what does the story mean? And what does the writer want us to think about? When we get to the end of the book, what does the writer want us to be mulling over in our minds as we contemplate what we've read? Okay, so let's apply this to A Christmas Carol now, and we'll start with the most basic sense of a theme, and the idea that a theme is the central topics. So what I'd like you to do is to pause this video for a minute or two and to think to yourself, what are the central topics in A Christmas Carol? What's this book about? Okay, so pause it now and just try and write down as many things as you can in maybe 2 to 3 minutes. Well done. So hopefully you managed to write a few down. I did the task at the same time as you. And these are the things that I wrote down. Money, poverty, greed, childhood, family, Christmas, human nature. Really, and not in any particular order, just the order they came to my brain as I sat here. But these are the topics. These are the words that tell us not what happens in the story, but the big ideas, what the book is about. Now, the reason I've put human nature at the bottom here, because that's all-encompassing. Whereas these are kind of quite specific topics of the story, human nature is a bigger conceptual idea. So I've put that in red because it's a little bit different to the others. Human nature just means most writers, try to use literature to understand, why do human beings do what they do? Why do we feel the emotions that we feel? And why do we behave in ways that can be quite negative and destructive? Dickens is no different. So he's looking at some very specific issues, but he's also looking at these ideas about why are human beings behaving the way they do. So if you didn't get a list, or your list isn't the same as mine, can you please copy this down so that you've got your list, but you've also got any on my list that you didn't already have. Okay, so now we know the topics. That's not enough. In literature, just if all we can say is that Dickens explores the theme of greed, and we just mention a topic, that's not going to get us very far, because what we actually need to do is to think, what are the underlying messages? So what I'd like to do for each topic that we've got listed is to write a few words, it doesn't have to even be a complete sentence, about what the message is, the big idea associated with the topic. So I'll show you what I mean with money first of all, because I think if you see me do it, you'll understand. So money is a theme of the novel. It's one of the topics that Dickens explores, and there's a clear message in it. And that message is that money does not buy happiness. We see throughout this story that Scrooge has got loads of money, but he's thoroughly miserable. So we're constantly being shown by Dickens that money does not buy happiness. The other message I think that's really important related to money is that it only has value if used to do good. And we see that with Scrooge very much so. When that money is sat in his safe or in the bank or wherever he keeps it, it has no value and it brings no joy to life. As soon as he uses that money to do good for others, he saves another human being's life. He enriches the value of society. So money only has real value if it's used to do good. And that's what I mean by the underlying messages. The topic of the book is money, and this is the message that Dickens suggests. Please can you pause this video for, it'll probably take you 5-10 minutes, and try to do the same as I did for all of the others. And just a few words to say, what do you think the message is that relates to each topic? Okay, well done guys. So hopefully you've got a few ideas. We'll just go through a couple together so that you can check against your own. I think poverty is a bit more tricky than money, isn't it? Poverty is a really important topic. He shows us lots of images of poverty in this novel. And I would say really his message is that nobody deserves the brutality and the harshness of poverty. So I'll write down the word harsh first of all, because we see a word in poverty is incredibly harsh. And I guess we could say the poor are people too. And I think that's a really important message that comes through. Just because people live in poverty doesn't mean they're inferior or unimportant to people who happen to have money. And poverty is a source of suffering. And it's really hard for us to understand the poverty of Victorian times. The people who lived in poverty, quite how dreadful and dire their circumstances were. Sleeping outdoors in vast numbers, not being able to eat, having to turn to all kinds of ways to survive that would be not your choice. So for us it's hard to understand, but for Dickens he knew about it, he saw it. Okay, greed then, obviously that's another big topic of this novel. And really I think what Dickens' message is that greed is the cause of human suffering. We constantly see this idea that if people share more, everybody is happier. Childhood, really important. We're going to focus on childhood a little bit more later in the lessons this week and think about the children we see. Key message about childhood, it relates really to poverty. This idea that poverty robs people of childhood. Poverty steals childhood. Childhood should be a time of joy and happiness, but actually throughout this novel we see the way that people cannot have that. Next one then, family. So this one's obviously opposite to money, because what we see here, what the suggestion is that family is the true source of happiness. That actually money only has value if used to do good, and we find true happiness and fulfillment through our relationships with others. There's also the suggestion, isn't it, that family isn't just the people that we are related to. Because Scrooge finds a family in the Cratchits. So family within this novel extends to friendship, the relationships we build not just with the people we're related to. Christmas then. So obviously this is a Christmas book, so one of the topics is Christmas. And what Dickens suggests is that the kindness of Christmas should last all year. We shouldn't have a few days a year where we're all kind and nice to each other, that should extend throughout the year. And so human nature then, I think, is probably too big for us just to write in a few words. But Dickens does seem to suggest to us that humans have the capacity for greed, but actually, if we reject greed, we can find much more happiness. Okay, so if you make a note of those things, please, because those will become useful to you later. So pause the video, make sure you've got those notes. The next thing I want to think about is what Dickens is communicating about his world. So we need to try and relate these themes to Dickens's world that he knew. And anything that happened in reality in history that relates to the themes and ideas. So again, if I do one, hopefully it will help you. So obviously, in terms of money, Dickens's world was very much split into rich and poor. There was a strong social divide. People in Victorian times, there was extreme poverty and no help apart from the dreaded workhouse, and we know how horrific and awful the workhouse was. So in terms of, we know that Dickens's message was that money doesn't buy happiness unless it's used to do good. But we can relate the topic of money to the world Dickens knew. And Dickens lived in a world which was strongly divided. And in Victorian times, there was extreme poverty and no help apart from the dreaded workhouse. So we've kind of covered two there, haven't we? Because we've covered money and poverty as a pair. So we'll move that one up there to show that they kind of go together. Okay, so can you try that for the others, please? Can you think specifically, not about how is greed shown in the book, what's the message in the book, but what do you know about Victorian England and greed in Victorian England? What do you know about childhood in Victorian England? You may not be able to do them all, but have a go at doing the ones you can. So please pause the video, it'll probably take you 5 minutes, because take a little bit of thought, and then we'll have some share some feedback. Okay, so for greed then, I think this relates very much, doesn't it, to the concept of the surplus population and the theory of the time, the economic policy, if you like, of the time, that argued that the death of the poor was an inevitable consequence of too many people. Dickens argued, didn't he, that the greed of the wealthy, the fact that the wealthy had so much, was the cause of poverty. So we'll add a note to say that Dickens Dickens thought that the poverty he witnessed was because people didn't share. He rejected the political belief that the death of the poor was inevitable. Okay, childhood then. Obviously, childhood in Victorian times, if you happened to be poor, you didn't get a childhood. You went to work at a very young age, doing dangerous, horrible jobs. You'd be lucky if you made it to 7 or 8 years old. The death rate amongst children was incredibly high because there was no real medication, no hospital system as such they could access, and they worked terrible jobs. So we can just add that note, can't we? In Victorian times, many children died young or were forced to work in dangerous jobs from a very young age. So something about childhood, not in A Christmas Carol, but in about Dickens's world. I won't put anything so much about family there, but for Christmas was actually quite a new concept at the time. So we can say it was, a new idea. But really, these are the important ones about the world. If we're going to understand Dickens's world, we have to understand the money, the poverty, the split and divide, the workhouse as the most terrible punishment for poverty, Dickens's view on the surplus population, and the way in which childhood children didn't have a childhood. So again, can you please make those notes? I'm going to have to end this video and start another one because I've run out of my 15 minutes. So that gives you time to copy down these notes before we start the next one.